History is not a series of accidents. It is a graveyard of empires that failed to recognize the moment their strength turned into a liability. I have spent decades watching the machinery of global power from the inside, and what I see today is a terrifying descent into strategic illiteracy. We are witnessing a performance of hegemony that has lost its script, led by men who mistake bluster for brilliance and coercion for diplomacy. The current theater in the Persian Gulf, specifically regarding Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, is a masterclass in this decline. There is a palpable, simmering tension in the air, a historical inevitability that suggests we are reaching the end of an era. It reminds me of the period preceding the Great Wars, where the old guard clung to their privileges, while the ground beneath them shifted irrevocably. We are told that diplomacy is alive and well, yet we see only its ghost. I remember a time, perhaps now viewed through the lens of a fading nostalgia, when diplomats actually considered it their job to prevent conflict rather than provide the moral cover for it. Today, that tradition has been replaced by a fraudulent imitation. Whether it is our posture toward Russia or the current fixation on Iran, the absence of genuine statecraft is glaring. Instead of dialogue, we have Project Freedom and Operation Epic Fury titles that sound more like Hollywood blockbusters than sober national security strategies. I recently observed the reports coming out of the administration, specifically the claims made by the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor. They tell us that the mission has met its objectives, that the crisis is concluded, and that the project is merely on pause. But anyone with a shred of realism knows this is a walkback of a disaster. It is a feeble attempt to mask a tactical retreat as a strategic victory. Take, for instance, the sheer audacity of the statements made by Marco Rubio. To claim that a blockade is not an act of war is to ignore 1,000 years of codified international law. It is an egregious distortion of reality. I find myself wondering what books these men are reading. Since the post-World War II era, and indeed long before it, the act of preventing a sovereign nation from accessing international waters has been recognized as a casus belli. This isn't just an academic point. It is the reason why, in 1962, during the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, John F. Kennedy was so meticulous about his language. He and his advisors, including McNamara and Bobby Kennedy, understood that a blockade of Cuba would be an undeniable act of war against the Soviet Union. They searched for a linguistic and legal loophole, eventually settling on the term quarantine. It was a medical term used to mask a military reality, but at least Kennedy had the intellectual depth to understand the stakes. Today's leadership seems to lack even that basic level of historical awareness. They utter war crimes from the podium as if they were reciting a grocery list, showing no comprehension of the legal or moral precipice upon which they stand. The failure in the Strait of Hormuz was objective and absolute. The administration wanted to force the strait open, to dictate the terms of commerce by sheer naval presence. But they found themselves staring into a void of their own creation. Now, we see a desperate search for an exit. The rhetoric is shifting because the reality on the water is unsustainable. I see a president who wants out, but lacks the coherence to find the door. He wants to carve a path that looks like success, even as the surface of the sea reflects only his impotence. The only sustainable outcome for the strait is one that involves local control, likely a consortium between Iran and Oman. They are the ones who live there. They are the ones who understand the geography and the stakes. They want to charge a modest fee for commerce, a toll for the passage of wealth. Yet, we act as if we can peel off 2,000 ships in the North Arabian Sea and escort them one by one with a fleet we no longer possess in sufficient numbers. It is a cocked-up plan, likely birthed in the depths of the Pentagon under a leadership that prioritizes fervor over facts. This brings us to the broader problem of our military-industrial complex and the obsolescence of our primary tools of power. We are pouring billions, $20, $21, $23 billion into aircraft carriers that are obsolete before they even hit the water. The Ford-class carriers, delayed by years and plagued by cost overruns, are sitting ducks in the face of modern first-tier warfare. Iran knows this. They have the capability to send 5,000 Americans to Davy Jones's locker and sink a $16 billion vessel. The reason they haven't done it isn't because they are afraid of our fury. It's because they are better thinkers than we are. They know that such an event would unify the American public in a way that their current slow-burning disdain for this war does not. The Iranians are playing a long game of regional security architecture while we are playing with kamikaze dolphins and outdated naval doctrines. Even our allies are beginning to show the strain of this Gic fervor. Look at the French sending the Charles de Gaulle carrier strike group to the Red Sea. It is a brave but ultimately meaningless display. It adds nothing to the actual combat power in the region. In fact, it might even be a detriment, a distraction that requires more coordination than it provides in utility. It is a show of strength intended to prove to the American administration that the Europeans are force amplifiers rather than dead weight. But what can the Europeans do if the Americans couldn't pull it off? The reality is that the entire transatlantic link is fraying. The era of hegemonic hubris, where we could absorb the costs of doing stupid things because we were the only power in the room, is over. We have spent 30 years ignoring the security concerns of others, from Russia to Iran, operating under the delusion that we could dictate terms forever. We stopped doing diplomacy because we thought we didn't have to. Why compromise when you can impose? That arrogance has now reached its breaking point. As I look at the state of our empire, I am struck by the contrast between our path and the one being forged by the global south. While we are fixated on blockades and war crimes, the rest of the world is meeting in Delhi for the 18th BRICS summit. Their theme building for resilience, innovation, cooperation, and sustainability is exactly what we should have been pursuing after the Cold War ended. Instead of primacy and the threat of bombing anyone who disagrees, they are talking about comedy and cooperation. This group includes the world's #1 economic power, China, and its soon-to-be #1 financial power. They are creating the world we promised to build in 1991, but abandoned in favor of a cynical pursuit of absolute dominance. We have become the recalcitrants of the world, the ones standing in the way of a functional international order. We have reached a point where our own leadership resembles the very powers we once fought to defeat. If you want to define the empire today, you have to look at the historical examples of the Third Reich or Imperial Japan. I say this not for shock value, but as a sober analytical observation. Where else do you hear a Secretary of War stand up and declare that he will send a nation back to the Dark Ages, that he will give no quarter? These are war crimes, plain and simple. Dwight Eisenhower isn't just rolling in his grave, he is spinning. He saw war for what it was, a catastrophe that claimed 100 million casualties, and he spent his presidency trying to build institutions like the United Nations to ensure it never happened again. We are now on the other side of that coin. We have become the bad guys in the global narrative, and the rest of the world is setting itself up to be the counterpart to the international law and human dignity we once championed, however imperfectly. If Americans do not wake up and confront this reality, we are driving ourselves directly into a wall. This collision is not just with an external reality, but with the very foundations of our own republic. There is a profound irony at play here, one that tastes of ash. We were presented with a leadership that initially appeared to make the case for walking back the empire. The rhetoric suggested a focus on shoring up the American core, saving the republic from the overextension that has historically bled every great power dry. But look at where we are now. Instead of a strategic retreat to preserve our internal strength, we are gambling the very existence of the republic to perpetuate a decaying empire. It is a desperate, high-stakes game played by people who have forgotten that an empire without a healthy republic is nothing more than a hollowed-out shell waiting for the first strong wind to topple it. When I look at the wider region, specifically the future of Israel and Iran, I see the consequences of this gamble in their most visceral form. One of the most unsettling aspects of our current posture is the role Israel plays in this imperial reprise. If we are to be honest, and honesty is a rare commodity in Washington, Israel has become a unique and volatile ingredient in this recipe for disaster. I've often compared the current dynamic to the darkest chapters of the mid-20th century, and the analogy, while harsh, is increasingly hard to ignore. We see a state that has moved so far from the ideals of a genuine democracy that it now functions as an apartheid entity maintained through violence and the unconditional backing of a global hegemon that has lost its own moral compass. Pick up a copy of the Israeli media on any given morning, read the headlines in Haaretz, and you will see an indictment more scathing than anything I could write. You see editorial writers and journalists who still possess a brain and a sense of freedom, essentially describing a state that is consuming itself from within. There is a brutal infighting occurring, with suggestions that Benjamin Netanyahu is risking the very survival of the state to maintain his own political grip. Yet, beneath that surface-level dissent, there is a chilling lack of deviation among the broader populace. The sentiment isn't, stop this madness because it's destroying our soul. It is, do more, hit harder, because if you don't, the state as we conceive it will vanish. And that conception is the problem. It is a conception of a state that excludes half its population, a state that has traded the possibility of a shared future for the certainty of perpetual conflict. Look at Lebanon today. What we are seeing isn't a targeted military operation. It is the raping, pillaging, and plundering of a sovereign nation. The president of Lebanon is understandably hesitant to even meet with Netanyahu while his country is being systematically dismantled. We will likely bend his arm, force him to the table, and call it diplomacy, but it is nothing more than the coercion of the weak by the ruthless. This is the clean break doctrine brought to its logical, bloody conclusion. For 30 years, the strategy has been to abandon diplomacy, to stop making compromises, and to simply impose one's will through overwhelming force, knowing the American hegemon is standing right behind you to ensure no one interferes. This hasn't just been bad for the region, it has been catastrophic for America's own interests. Having the big bad U.S. as a permanent insurance policy has allowed our allies to indulge in their worst impulses, shielding them from the natural consequences of their own arrogance. This hegemonic hubris isn't limited to the Middle East. It is the rot at the heart of the entire transatlantic alliance. Why talk to your opponent when you can dictate terms? This is the question that has governed our interactions with the world since the end of the Cold War. We see it in Europe, where for 30-plus years, the security concerns of the largest European country, Russia, were treated as a nuisance to be ignored rather than a reality to be managed. It makes no sense from a realist perspective unless you view it through the lens of an empire that believes it has reached the end of history. The Europeans, in their own way, have been just as intoxicated by this arrogance. They have spent decades hanging on to the tail of the American shirt, assuming the cushion would always be there. But that tail is being withdrawn. The European leaders we see today, the Macrons, the Scholz, the Starmer, are not long for their positions. They are being hollowed out by a populace that is beginning to realize that the path they've been led down is a dead end. My concern isn't just that they will be gone, but what will replace them. Will it be a return to the fractured nationalist turmoil of the 1930s, or will someone emerge who understands the need for comedy and cooperation? I am not European, and as Margaret Thatcher once noted, the problem with Americans is that we only visit while they have to live there. I cannot predict the specific political outcomes, but I know that if Europe continues to tether itself to a declining American empire, it will go down with the ship. The tragedy is that the generation of leaders who understood the horrors of war is gone. I remember what Colin Powell told me back in 1989. He warned that once the generation that had their feet in the dye and the blood of World War II passed away, Europe and the West would become different, more dangerous places. He was right. We no longer have leaders who view war as a last resort because they have seen its face. We have leaders who view war as a policy tool, a line item in a budget, or a way to boost polling numbers. We have forgotten that security through dominance is a myth, a dangerous one that carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. We are now entering a phase where the great irony is no longer a literary device, but a daily reality. We are destroying the very things we claim to protect. We talk about democracy while supporting apartheid. We talk about international law while committing war crimes. We talk about stability while we set the world on fire. The American people need to wake up and see that we are in the dock of history. We are the ones being accused. And the retribution, when it comes, will be as sure as the pillar of salt that Lot's wife became. We are leaving the next generation with a horrendous debt, a world of alienated allies, and a nuclear arsenal that is being expanded with a lethality that suggests we are looking for a first strike capability we can ride out. This is the madness of an empire that has lost its way, and the clock is ticking. This pursuit of a first strike capability isn't just a military ambition. It is a symptom of a deeper existential rot that has permeated our strategic thinking. We have entered a realm of madness where our planners actually believe they can ride out a nuclear retaliation. They are looking to double the number of warheads and triple their lethality, all in the pursuit of a decisive blow that history tells us is a fantasy. It is as if we have forgotten that we all reside on the same planet. You cannot repeatedly strike a target on this earth without the fallout, both literal and metaphorical, eventually consuming you as well. This technological hubris is perhaps the most dangerous legacy of our unipolar moment. We have become so accustomed to dominance that we now believe we can master even the apocalypse. I look at what is happening in India, for example. Why would a nation like India be building and deploying a 70,000-kilometer containerized road-mobile ICBM like the Agni V? This is a missile capable of 30,000 kilometers per hour, carrying multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles. No Golden Dome or missile defense system is going to stop it. When a nation like India, which has historically balanced its interests with a degree of caution, starts deploying such city killers, you have to wonder what they smell in the wind. They see an empire in decline, an empire that has become unpredictable and violent. And they are preparing for a world where the old umbrellas of security no longer exist. We are driving even the most level-headed actors into a frantic arms race because we have destroyed the very concept of a stable security architecture. This brings us back to a point made by George Kennan in the late 80s. He argued that if the Soviet Union were to disappear tomorrow, the American military-industrial complex would have to invent a new enemy simply because too much of our economy and our national identity is tied to the preparation for war. We are seeing the fulfillment of that prophecy today. Our entire international structure has become dependent on the existence of threats. Alliance systems like NATO or our regional pacts in the Pacific only retain their cohesion if there is a common enemy to point to. When peace begins to break out, as we saw when the Chinese facilitated a rapprochement between the Saudis and the Iranians, it sends shockwaves through Washington. Peace is not a friend to the empire. It is a threat to the mechanisms of control that keep our allies obedient and our defense contractors profitable. I often reflect on the report from Iron Mountain, a controversial study from the 60s that concluded human society requires an existential threat for political rule. It argued that without the threat of war, or some equivalent force, social cohesion would dissolve. For millennia, that force was religion, the fear of divine retribution. In the modern era, we replaced it with the fear of the other, the ideological or national enemy. But as I read the latest reports on the climate crisis, I see a quintessential, lethal, and truly existential threat that should be the foundation of a new global cooperation. The record-breaking temperatures in Europe, the vanishing ice caps, the systemic collapse of ecosystems, these are the real enemies. We have a 100-year project staring us in the face, a project of resilience, innovation, and sustainability. This was the announced purpose of the BRICS summit in Delhi. While we are fixated on tribalism and continuous warfare, others are at least pretending to address the threat that will eventually kill us all, regardless of our nationality. But will we join them? Or are we too far gone? Our leadership today seems incapable of even perceiving this shift. They are trapped in a cycle of heroic displays and tactical blunders. I look at the people currently running our foreign policy men who talk about using dolphins for naval warfare, or who dismiss the basic tenets of international law, and I realize we have lost our way. There is no one left with the gravitas of a Powell or the cold realism of a Kennan. We have replaced them with ideologues and warriors who have never seen a bomb drop on their own soil. Since 1865, Americans have been shielded from the visceral reality of war. We have not seen armies marching across our front lawns. We have not felt the earth shake under a barrage. This lack of experience has bred a dangerous nonchalance toward violence. We wage wars from air-conditioned rooms in Virginia, oblivious to the fact that the cost of our hubris is being paid in blood thousands of miles away. The tragedy of our current situation is that we are setting ourselves up to be the next victim of a Nuremberg-style tribunal. By uttering war crimes as policy, by declaring that we will destroy entire nations and give no quarter, we are placing ourselves in the dock of history. We are mirroring the very behaviors of the powers we fought in World War II. We have become the empire that sanctions, bombs, and coerces, while the other side, the emerging multipolar world, is positioning itself as the champion of the international law we helped create. They are adopting the language of cooperation and stability that we abandoned. It is a stunning reversal of roles. We must confront the fact that our dominance was not just based on military might, but on a perceived moral authority that we have systematically dismantled. In the post-war era, we were respected not just because we had the bomb, but because we acted as if we cared about the 100 million people who had died. We put effort into the Geneva Conventions, the United Nations, and the rebuilding of our enemies. We practiced diplomacy because we knew the alternative was unthinkable. Today, diplomacy is dead. We don't talk to our opponents. We dictate to them. And if they don't obey, we try to starve them through sanctions or break them through proxies. This is not the behavior of a leader. It is the behavior of a bully who is starting to realize the rest of the neighborhood is no longer afraid. If we don't change course, if we don't find a way to extricate ourselves from these self-imposed crises in Iran, Ukraine, and beyond, we are heading for an absolute disaster. The world is moving on without us. They are building new financial systems, new security pacts, and new narratives that do not include American primacy. When the current system finally fractures, when the tail of the shirt is finally withdrawn, we will find ourselves alone in a world that remembers every hypocrisy and every war crime we committed. In the name of freedom, the clock is not just ticking for our enemies. It is ticking for us. This ticking clock is most audible in the corridors of power where we once dictated the global financial order. We are currently engaged in what I can only describe as a triple front of strategic incompetence. We treat our economic war with China, our proxy conflict with Russia, and our direct provocations against Iran as three separate theaters. But in reality, our own heavy-handedness has forced these powers into a marriage of necessity that will eventually be our undoing. I see the councils in Beijing, Moscow, and New Delhi looking at the American empire not with fear, but with a growing sense of collective defiance. They are no longer waiting for us to lead. They are actively building the infrastructure to bypass us entirely. Take the economic dimension. For decades, the U.S. Treasury and the SWIFT system were the ultimate enforcers of our hegemony. If you didn't follow the Washington line, we simply unplugged you from the world's heart. But look at what is happening now. China has begun to ban its own companies from abiding by U.S. sanctions. They are not just resisting, they are counterattacking. I recall the recent mandates from Xi Jinping, which essentially signaled a promise to obliterate the Bretton Woods system and toss our financial coercion into the garbage can. When 2.6 billion people are under some form of U.S. Sanctions, the sanctions themselves lose their meaning. We have reached a saturation point where the sanctioned world is becoming more economically vibrant and interconnected than the one we still control. If the BRICS nations succeed in creating a viable alternative to the dollar and the SWIFT system, we are, quite simply, toast. It is just a matter of time before someone puts a stake in the heart of our financial primacy. The situation with Iran is the catalyst for this broader collapse. Washington justifies its actions in Venezuela or Iran by claiming that China shouldn't have this oil. It is a blatant attempt to control the world's energy spigots through force, but the Iranians, backed by Russian military support and Chinese economic lifelines, are showing the world that the American security umbrella is full of holes. We see Russia stepping up with more forceful support for Tehran, recognizing that our failure in the Strait of Hormuz is a victory for their own vision of a multipolar world. This isn't just about regional dominance. It is about the destruction of the post-1945 order. We are witnessing the birth of a new security architecture where the great powers of the East find common cause in balancing against the erratic, violent impulses of a declining West. I find it particularly galling to witness the level of absurdity that has taken hold of our leadership during this crisis. When I hear General Kane or Pete Hegseth discussing the use of kamikaze dolphins or other such nonsense, I realize that the intellectual depth of our national security apparatus has hit rock bottom. We are led by men who cannot crawl into the heads of their opponents because they possess no strategic empathy, no understanding of history, and seemingly no capacity for sober analysis. They operate in a vacuum of their own making, where American exceptionalism serves as a substitute for actual thought. This is why we have lost the ability to do diplomacy. To negotiate, you must first understand your opponent's legitimate security concerns. But in the current Washington environment, even acknowledging that Russia or Iran has security interests is viewed as a form of treason. This brings me back to the generational shift that Powell warned me about. We are now living in the world he feared, a world where no one in power has a healthy respect for war. The World War II generation, even as 12 or 13-year-olds, understood the dye and the blood. They knew that war was not a game. But today's leaders grew up in a world of uncontested dominance and sanitized, distant conflicts. They believe they can bomb their way out of any problem without consequences. They have forgotten the lesson that every empire eventually learns, that dominance is temporary, but geography and history are permanent. The irony is that our efforts to shore up the empire are actually accelerating its demise. By using our alliance systems as tools of coercion, we are causing them to fragment. Look at the Germans. Their foreign minister claims Israel has every right to be in South Lebanon, echoing the same Germany that backed the atrocities in Gaza. They think they are doing our dirty work, but they are actually hollowed out entities following a leader that is driving over a cliff. This hegemonic hubris has reached ridiculous levels. We think we can ignore the security of the largest European country, Russia, for 30 years and expect no reaction. We think we can surround Iran with bases and cripple its economy with sanctions for 47 years and expect it to just roll over. This is not strategy. It is a collective delusion. We are entering a period where the world is essentially separating into two realities. One is the sentient world, those who recognize the existential threats of nuclear war and climate collapse and are trying to build resilience through cooperation. The other is the world of the empire, a world of tribalism, perpetual warfare, and the desperate pursuit of a dominance that has already slipped through its fingers. I am increasingly convinced that if we do not find a way to extricate ourselves from this Rubio-Hegseth-Trump mindset, we are heading for an absolute disaster. The rest of the world is preparing for our expiration. They are building the new world in Delhi, in Beijing, and in Moscow, and they are doing it because we gave them no other choice. I look at the historical precedents of empires that expired, the Nebuchadnezzars, the Genghis Khans, and I realized that they all had one thing in common. They didn't have the technology to destroy the entire world as they went down. We do. And that is what worries the hell out of me. Every sentient human being should be terrified by the fact that a dying empire, led by men who believe in kamikaze dolphins and first strike capabilities, still holds the keys to the apocalypse. We have lost the luxury of learning from our mistakes. In the nuclear age, you only get to make a mistake once. The shift from Operation Epic Fury to Project Freedom is perhaps the most cynical rebranding exercise I have witnessed in my career. We are told that the mission to neutralize Iran's missile and drone infrastructure was a resounding success, that the objectives were met and that the war is over. But look at the reality behind the curtain. President Trump has placed his newest initiative on pause, ostensibly at the request of Pakistan and other regional actors. But the truth is far more damning. The pause isn't a gesture of peace, it is a recognition of failure. They tried to open the Strait of Hormuz by force, and they realized that they simply do not have the capacity to sustain the cost. When the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, stands before the world and claims that this new defensive mission is about protecting commerce, he's essentially admitting that the offensive phase was a disaster. It is a temporary retreat before the next inevitable ramp-up, a deception designed to carve a way out of a situation that has become strategically untenable. The moral dimension of this policy is nothing short of an abyss. We have reached a point where the leadership of the United States openly utters war crimes as if they were standard operating procedures. When Pete Hegseth speaks of sending a nation back to the Dark Ages, or when the administration ignores the 1,000-year-old legal definition of a blockade as an act of war, they are not just being tough, they are dismantling the very concept of international order. Dwight Eisenhower understood that the legitimacy of power rests on its adherence to law. We have abandoned that principle entirely. We are setting ourselves up for a future Nuremberg tribunal. Except this time, we will be the ones in the docket. The world is watching us destroy Karg Island and target civilian infrastructure, and they are taking notes. They see the systemic hypocrisy of an empire that demands obedience to rules-based order while it violates every rule on the books. This brings us to the unique and volatile role of Israel in this imperial collapse. As I've noted before, the relationship between this administration and the Netanyahu government has taken on a chilling historical resonance. Israel has become the catalyst for our most violent and blatant impulses. We see it in the systematic dismantling of Lebanon, what can only be described as the raping, pillaging, and plundering of a sovereign nation under the guise of security. The president of Lebanon is rightly revolted, yet we continue to bend his arm, forcing a facade of diplomacy while the bombs continue to fall. We are supporting an apartheid state that has abandoned even the pretense of democracy. I have said it many times, and I will say it again. Israel, in its current configuration, cannot persist in the Levant. It has created a sea of enemies who will not forget. Unless it returns to being a genuine democracy that accepts all its citizens, Christians, Arabs, and Jews alike, it is on a path to self-destruction, and it is dragging the American Republic down with it. The irony is that even as our allies complain about Trump's America First rhetoric, they continue to toe the line. Germany, for instance, has backed the atrocities in Gaza and continues to claim that Israel is doing the dirty work in Iran and Lebanon. This is the tragic legacy of the hegemonic era. When you have a hegemon that can absorb the costs of doing stupid things, its allies lose the incentive to act with any degree of strategic autonomy or moral clarity. They have become appendages of an empire that is increasingly erratic. Why engage in diplomacy with Russia or Iran when you can rely on the big bad US to impose your will? This arrogance has reached a breaking point. The Europeans are smart enough to know that this path leads to ruin, yet their current leadership seems incapable of severing the link. They are hanging onto the tail of a shirt that is being pulled over a cliff. Contrast this with the vision emerging from the global south. While we were launching Epic Fury, the BRICS nations were meeting in Delhi to discuss a world built on resilience and sustainability. They are moving from the planning phase of de-dollarization to actual deployment. The unit payment system and the interoperability of digital currencies, like the ruble, yuan, and rupee, are no longer theoretical. They are the new reality. China and India are not looking to start wars. They are looking to build a financial and technological architecture that is immune to American coercion. When Xi Jinping fulfills his promise to trash the SWIFT system and bypass OFAC sanctions, our primary tool of global control will vanish. We are being outthought and outmaneuvered by powers that are playing a 100-year game while we are fixated on the next news cycle and kamikaze dolphins. The generational void I mentioned earlier has left us with a leadership that views the world as a video game. They have no comprehension of the fact that Americans haven't seen a bomb drop on their own soil since 1865. This lack of historical memory has bred a dangerous hubris. We believe we can wage a limited war against Iran, sink their navy, and strike their nuclear sites without triggering a global catastrophe. But Iran is not a passive actor. They are better thinkers than we are. They know that if they were to sink a $16 billion aircraft carrier and put 5,000 Americans in Davy Jones's locker, the American public might finally wake up to the madness. They are biding their time, allowing our own internal contradictions and strategic failures to do their work for them. We are driving ourselves into a wall, and the tragedy is that we are doing it with a smile, convinced of our own exceptionalism, even as the dock of history waits for us. We are standing on the precipice of a finality that our ancestors could never have imagined. For 5,000 years, empires have risen and fallen, but the sword was always limited by the reach of the arm that swung it. Nebuchadnezzar, Cyrus, Genghis Khan, they could destroy cities, they could enslave populations, but they could not extinguish the torch of human life itself. Today, that has changed. The one thing that makes this era existentially different from the 1930s is the presence of 30,000 warheads and the terrifying evolution of delivery systems. I look at the Agni V, a 70,000 km/h monster deployed on the roads of India, carrying MIRV warheads capable of pinpointing silos with a lethality that mocks any Golden Dome. This is the world we have built through our abandonment of diplomacy. We have cornered the rest of the planet into a state of permanent, high-alert readiness, and we have done so while losing our own comprehension of what war actually entails. I recall my conversations with Colin Powell in the late 80s. He was deeply concerned that as the generation who had seen the dye and the blood of World War II passed away, we would lose the essential caution that keeps a nuclear-armed world from self-immolating. He was right. There is no one left in the halls of power who has seen an army march across their front lawn. There is no one left who remembers the smell of a firestorm. Consequently, we make silly, dangerous decisions because we view war as a remote, manageable exercise. We talk about first strike capabilities and riding out retaliation as if we were discussing a quarterly budget adjustment. It is a grotesque failure of the imagination. We are trying to win a game that has no winners, only survivors who will eventually envy the dead. The great irony of our current posture is that the very dominance we seek is the instrument of our isolation. Our hubris has reached a level where we believe we can dictate the terms of existence for the entire world. But the world is refusing the terms. The 18th BRICS summit in Delhi isn't just another talk shop. It is a declaration of independence from the American empire. While we project epic fury and freedom, they are building for resilience and cooperation. They are realizing that they don't need our permission to exist, to trade, or to secure their own borders. When the economic weight of China, the technological growth of India, and the raw resources of Russia finally align into a functional alternative to the Bretton Woods system, the American empire will find itself not just defeated, but irrelevant. We will be toast, sitting atop a mountain of debt and obsolete aircraft carriers, wondering why the rest of the world stopped answering our calls. I find myself in a state of profound pessimism as I watch the current theater in the Middle East. I see reports that we are just waiting for the weekend to resume the incredible bombing of Iran. We are probing, walking back, then ramping up again, all while our leadership suggests that a blockade isn't an act of war and that dolphins will save our Navy. It is a descent into madness. We are driving ourselves into a wall over a cliff, and we are doing it because we have lost the ability to speak the language of diplomacy. Why talk to an opponent when you can dictate? That single question has been the poison at the heart of our foreign policy for 30 years. It has destroyed our credibility, alienated our allies, and created a world where our enemies have no choice but to find common cause against us. We are now the ones in the dock. History is preparing its indictment, and the evidence is overwhelming. We have supported apartheid while preaching democracy. We have uttered war crimes while claiming the moral high ground. We have weaponized the global financial system until it became a liability to ourselves. We are mirroring the very powers we once sacrificed millions of lives to defeat. If Dwight Eisenhower could see us now, he would not just be spinning in his grave. He would be screaming for us to stop. He knew that the military-industrial complex would eventually become a parasite that consumes the republic it was meant to defend. That day has arrived. We are gambling our very survival to perpetuate an empire that has no clothes and no conscience. The choice before us is stark. We can continue down this path of heroic displays and tactical disasters, or we can wake up to the reality that the unipolar moment is dead and buried. We must return to the realism that defined the best of our history, the realism that understands that every nation has legitimate security concerns and that peace is the only sustainable foundation for prosperity. We need to stop inventing enemies to justify our defense budgets and start recognizing the existential threats that actually face us, the nuclear clock and the changing climate. These are the forces that will kill us all if we do not find a way to cooperate. The Project Freedom we should be pursuing is freedom from the tribalism and the perpetual warfare that is currently driving us toward extinction. I suspect I will be disappointed. I suspect the bombs will fall, the rhetoric will escalate, and the warriors in Washington will continue to play their dangerous games. But as a realist, I must state the truth as I see it. We are not the leaders of a new world order. We are the recalcitrant remnants of an old one. The rest of the planet is moving toward a multipolar future defined by resilience and innovation, and they are doing it specifically to protect themselves from us. If we do not alter our course, we will achieve the ultimate victory of the hegemon. We will be the masters of a graveyard. It is time to dismantle the machine of empire before it finishes dismantling the republic. We must demand a return to genuine diplomacy, a recognition of international law, and an end to the hubris that tells us we are the only sentient beings on this planet. The dock is waiting, and the retribution of history is as sure as a pillar of salt. You must confront the reality that your safety has been built on a foundation of myths, and that the bill for 30 years of arrogance is finally coming due. Demand that your leaders stop playing with the apocalypse and start engaging with the world as it actually exists, not as they wish to dictate it. We are at the end of the line, and the next move determines whether there is a line at all for the next generation. If we have lost the generation that understood the true horrors of war, are we doomed to rediscover those horrors through our own total destruction? Can a republic survive when it has traded its soul and its solvency to maintain an empire that the rest of the world is actively dismantling?